The woman behind the safe deposit desk stopped smiling the moment she scanned the little brass key I slid across the counter. She typed something, frowned, typed again. Then she picked up the phone without a word, turned her back to me, and spoke in the low, careful voice people use when they don't want to be overheard. 2 minutes later, a man in a gray suit came out from a back office, and he wasn't walking like a man who was about to tell me my grandmother's box held a stack of yellowed birthday cards. His face had gone the color of paper. He asked me, very politely, to step into his office. Then he asked his assistant to lock the lobby doors and not let anyone leave until the police got there. He was holding my grandmother's worn leather music folder like it might go off in his hands. But I'm jumping to the end. Let me back up, because the only way any of this makes sense is from the beginning. And the beginning starts at a funeral nobody in my family actually wanted to attend. My name is Stella. I'm 29 and I work as a title examiner for a small escrow office outside Pittsburgh, which is the least glamorous job you can imagine, and exactly the right job for a person like me. All day long, I read deeds and liens and old transfer records, looking for the one thing that's wrong. The signature that doesn't match, the lien somebody forgot to release, the easement nobody disclosed. I'm the person who finds the problem on page 40 that everybody else skipped. My family always treated that like a personality defect. My grandmother treated it like a gift. Her name was Opal. She was 84 when she died, and to almost everyone in town, she was just the little woman who taught piano for 50 years out of the front room of a clapboard cottage in Brinkley, a speck of a place about an hour and a half north of the city, where there's one diner, one stoplight, and a church bell that's been 6 minutes past since the Carter administration. People thought she had nothing. An old upright piano, a metronome, a tin of butterscotch she kept by the door for the kids she taught. That was the story everyone believed, and it was exactly the story my aunt wanted everyone to keep believing. The funeral was on a Wednesday. My aunt, my mother's older sister, ran it like she ran everything, which is to say like a woman timing a casserole. The service was scheduled for 35 minutes, and not 1 minute more. She picked the cheapest casket and the cheapest flowers and a luncheon with the kind of grocery store sheet cake that tastes like sweetened drywall. My grandmother, who once made me redo a single measure of Clementi 40 times because the left hand was lazy, would have walked out of her own funeral over that cake. My cousin showed up 20 minutes late in a watch that cost more than my car, shook a few hands, hugged my aunt, and spent the rest of the hour thumbing through his phone in the back pew like he was waiting for a flight. He'd been to that cottage maybe twice in the last decade, both times to ask my grandmother for money. He did not look like a man who had lost anyone. He looked like a man checking the clock. I want to be honest about something because it matters. My grandmother and I had never been loud about how close we were. We didn't post about it, but every other Sunday for most of my life, I drove up to that cottage and we played four-hand arrangements badly and drank lukewarm tea, and she told me the same stories twice, and I let her. She was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw a person instead of a chore. So when she got sick that last winter, and my aunt suddenly became her caretaker and started screening her phone calls, I noticed. I want that on the record. I noticed, and I didn't push hard enough, and I'll carry that. 2 weeks before she died, I sat on the edge of her bed while my aunt was out picking up a prescription. My grandmother's body had gotten so small under the quilt, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She reached up and grabbed my wrist, with a grip I didn't think she had left in her, and she pulled me down close, and she whispered it like a secret passed under a door. "The folder," she said, the slow movement, "only you." That was it. Her eyes were locked on mine to make sure it landed. I said okay. I said I'd promised, even though I had no idea what I was promising. She nodded once, satisfied, and let go. And a few minutes later, my aunt came back through the door with a paper bag and a smile that didn't reach anything. And my grandmother's face closed up like a music box lid, coming down. She died 11 days later. After the service, everyone went back to the cottage, and my aunt was already moving through the rooms with the energy of a real estate agent at an open house. She had a buyer interested, she said. Good price, quick, close. My cousin nodded along and asked which of the antiques were worth anything. They talked about my grandmother's whole life like it was inventory, and the casseroles weren't even cold. I slipped into the front room, the music room, where the upright still stood with the bench in front of it and the metronome on top, that little wooden pyramid she swore by. The slow movement? I knew exactly what she meant, because I'd known her for 29 years. There was a piece she made every student learn last. A slow second movement she said you couldn't play until you'd learned how to wait. And she kept the sheet music for it in a cracked leather folder she'd had since before I was born, tucked in the cubby under the bench seat where the music lived. I lifted the seat. The folder was right where it always was. When I picked it up, it was heavier than it should have been. Weighted wrong, the way a book feels when something's been slid inside the cover. And here's where I did the one thing that probably saved everything. I did not carry it out into the living room. I did not announce my discovery to a family of people my grandmother had just spent her dying breath telling me not to trust. I slid that folder straight down into my bag, sat at the piano for a minute so it would look natural, and then I went and made myself a cup of that terrible reception coffee. But my aunt missed nothing. She came into the music room maybe 10 minutes later, and her eyes went to the bench, and then to me, and something flickered. "What have you got there?" she said, too lightly. I told her I'd just been sitting at the piano for a minute, saying goodbye to it. Her gaze dropped to the open cubby under the bench seat, the cubby where the leather folder had always been and now very clearly was not, and I watched her do the math. She wouldn't want things going missing before the estate settled, she said. "Everything's accounted for, Della. Everything." I said, of course. I said I wouldn't dream of it, and I left. And I drove the 90 minutes home with that folder in the passenger seat like it was a person, gripping the wheel and trying to figure out why a woman who just inherited a dead piano teacher's furniture cared so much about an old music folder. If you're still with me, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every one of them, and I want to know who's out there listening. Now let me tell you what was inside that folder. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. The first thing I found was the sheet music, exactly the piece I expected, the slow movement, every penciled fingering in her hand. But behind it, taped to the inside of the back cover so flat I almost missed it, was a small brass key. Not a house key, a safe deposit key, stamped with a number. And folded behind that, no bigger than a guitar pick, was a note in handwriting I'd have known anywhere. They emptied the rest. This one they never found. Garrison Trust, Brinkley. Box and account. Ask for the manager, not the window. Trust no paper with my name signed by another hand. Only you, Della. You always heard the wrong notes before anyone else. I read it maybe 6 times, they never found. Not, I never told. Found. Which meant they'd been looking. Which meant there was something to look for. Which meant my grandmother, the little piano teacher everyone pitied for having nothing, had been hiding money from her own family, and she'd left exactly one person the key. I'm a title examiner. The first thing I did before anything else was photograph everything. The folder, the note, the key, both sides, and I uploaded the pictures to the cloud right there at the kitchen table. Because if there's one thing my job has burned into me, it's this. Paper disappears, people lie, but a time-stamped copy in 3 places is forever. I learned that hard, watching deals fall apart over a single missing release. I wasn't about to learn it again. The first call came at 9 the next morning. My aunt, voice dipped in honey she does not naturally possess. "Just checking on me," she said. "Such a hard week." And then, smooth as anything, "You didn't take anything from the house, did you, sweetheart? We have to keep it all together for the estate." I lied without a flicker. "Just one of Grandma's old music books," I told her, "for the memories." There was a pause on the line, a long one, and I could practically hear her deciding whether to push. "Which one?" she finally asked. I named a beginner method book, something worthless. The relief in her voice was almost funny. "That's fine," she said. "But don't go poking around her things anymore. Your grandmother got confused at the end, Della. She'd hide things, lose things, say things that weren't true. It was sad. Let it rest. I said nothing, but I'll tell you what I was thinking. 11 days before she died, my grandmother looked me dead in the eye and told me three things in the exact right order, and there was nothing confused about any of it. That wasn't a woman losing her mind. That was a woman making her last move and making sure I'd be the one to play it. The second call came that evening. My cousin, who had not voluntarily dialed my number in 3 years, the last time was to ask if I still had her grandfather's old shotgun, which he then sold. Suddenly, he wanted to check in. His voice was doing this warm, easy thing it does when he wants something. Hey, you doing okay? Mom said you've been asking about Grandma's stuff. Then, casual as a man stretching, you know there's really nothing there, right? The house, some furniture. Mom's handling the sale, I'm dealing with the property side. You don't gotta worry about a thing. There it was, laid out clean. My aunt gets the money. My cousin gets the property. I get to go home and be grateful. They'd already divided her up, and the two of them had called 9 hours apart, my aunt in the morning, my cousin at night, both fishing for the exact same thing. What did I know, and what had I taken? People don't coordinate like that unless they're scared of something. I wrote both calls down word for word, time, length, exact phrases. Then I looked at that little brass key and the note in my grandmother's hand, and I knew where I was going the next morning. Garrison Trust was the kind of bank that had been swallowed by something bigger 20 years ago, but kept its old branch in Brinkley because the town would have rioted otherwise. One teller window, a coffee machine that predated me, and a manager whose office had a real wooden door. I walked in at 9:15 with the key, my grandmother's death certificate, my own ID, and the documents proving I was family, expecting maybe a forgotten CD with a couple $1,000s in it. Closure mostly. A goodbye. I asked for the manager, not the window, exactly like she told me. His name was Mr. Delgado, and he took the key and the box number and he typed, and then he stopped typing. He looked at the screen for a long second. Then he excused himself and made a call from the back, and I sat in that lobby for 25 minutes learning the entire life story of the security guard, a sweet older man whose wife had just put him on a low-sodium diet and who said the word unsalted the way other people say the word divorce. When Mr. Delgado came back, his face had changed. He brought me into his office, shut the wooden door, and sat down heavily. He had me open the box myself. In front of him, which I later learned is procedure when something's flagged. Inside that box was not a couple $1,000s. Inside that box was a stack of certificate of deposit receipts, a brokerage statement, a small spiral notebook full of my grandmother's tidy handwriting, a manila envelope, and a cassette tape with a date written on the label in ballpoint. The brokerage statement was on top. I picked it up and I made a sound I have never made before or since, somewhere between a hiccup and a sob and the noise a balloon makes when you let the neck go. $1,840,000. A little over. My grandmother, the piano teacher, the woman everyone in town pitied for living on Social Security and butterscotch. $1.8 million sitting in CDs and a conservative brokerage account she had quietly built and hidden in a box nobody in my family knew existed. Mr. Delgado wasn't celebrating with me. If anything, he looked sicker than before. Miss, he said carefully, I need to tell you why this box is flagged in our system. He slid the manila envelope toward me. Back in 2017, someone came in and tried to access this account. They presented a durable power of attorney for your grandmother and what appeared to be her signature, authorizing a full transfer. Our verification flagged it. The signature didn't match the exemplar we had on file, close, but the pressure was wrong, the letters too even. We declined the transaction and logged the attempt as a security event. He paused. The person who attempted it was listed as your grandmother's daughter. Your aunt, I guess. My mouth went dry. My aunt had tried to drain this account 7 years before I ever held the key. She'd known there was money. She just hadn't known where. Then I opened the notebook, and the whole picture came up out of the page like a developing photograph, and it was so much worse than one bad afternoon. My grandmother had been an accountant's daughter and a bookkeeper before she ever taught a scale. She kept records her entire life out of pure habit. And starting about a year after my own father died, which is when my aunt first got herself named as my grandmother's helper with the bills, the notebook turned into a ledger of theft. Withdrawal after withdrawal in my grandmother's hand, each one annotated. Not mine. Did not authorize. $4,000 claims for roof. No roof done. Page after page. CDs cashed early. A second savings account drained to zero. A reverse mortgage application my grandmother had refused to sign. With a note beside it, S wants me to sign. Says it's for taxes. It is not for taxes. S for my aunt. Mr. Delgado pulled the bank's own records while I sat there. Over about 6 years working through a power of attorney she'd gotten by convincing a doctor my grandmother was slipping, my aunt had bled close to $1.5 million out of every account she could find. And my grandmother, who could hear a flat note from across a room, had heard every dollar leave. She just couldn't stop it. She'd been declared mentally unreliable on paper. So when she tried to tell anyone, they patted her hand. Her own daughter had the documents that said she was confused. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over her devoted, exhausted caretaker? So she did the only thing left to her, the thing she did best. When she figured out what was happening, she quietly opened this one account at a branch in a town her daughter never visited, moved the last clean money she had into it, and buried the key inside the one object on earth her daughter would never bother to open, a piece of sheet music nobody else in the family could read. "There's a recording," Mr. Delgado said quietly, looking at the cassette in my hand. "I can't tell you what's on it, but your grandmother left a sealed instruction with this box, and it names you. And it says, I'm to contact our fraud department and the authorities the moment the box is opened by you." He reached for his phone. "Miss, this account is evidence in what looks like a serious case of elder financial exploitation. I'm going to have to call some people." I nodded. I came in expecting a goodbye, and I left with a fortune and a paper trail proving my aunt was the thief. And somewhere, I swear, my grandmother was tapping a foot, keeping time. If this is hitting close to home, and I know for some of you it is because I've read your comments, go ahead and hit subscribe and stay with me, because the part that broke my heart wide open is still coming. It wasn't the money. The police arrived within the hour. The case got handed to a detective named Reyes out of the Financial Crimes Unit, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the flat, patient calm of someone who has seen this exact thing 100 times. And she had. "It's the fastest growing crime against the elderly in this country," she told me, "and almost every time it's family. The person stealing is the person they trust to feed them." She looked at the ledger in its evidence bag for a long moment. "Most of them never leave a record like this. Your grandmother built a case from inside a trap, that's rare." The cassette turned out to be my grandmother, lucid and steady, recording a phone call where my aunt pressured her to sign the reverse mortgage and got nasty when she wouldn't. And a second recording where my aunt flat out said the money would be handled, whether my grandmother liked it or not. My grandmother had set a tape recorder by the phone, an 80-something woman outflanking a thief with technology older than I am. 3 days later, I got a call from an attorney named Mr. Brennan, 70-some years old, who'd known my grandmother for 40 years because she'd taught all 4 of his kids. "Your grandmother gave me an instruction a long time ago," he said. "If she died, I was to call you. Only you." She was very specific. I drove to his office that afternoon, a little wood-paneled practice over a hardware store, and he put a thick file on the desk between us. "She spent the last 3 years putting this together," he said. "She knew nobody would believe her while she was alive, so she made sure it wouldn't matter." Inside that file was everything, organized the way a bookkeeper organizes things. Copies of the forged power of attorney, set side by side with pages of my grandmother's real signature, so you could see the difference once you knew to look. The loops too clean, the line too steady. A tracer's hand instead of an old woman's. Bank statements. A timeline. And at the bottom, in a sealed envelope, a sworn statement she'd had notarized 2 years before she died, with Mr. Brennan as witness. I am of sound mind. I know exactly what is being done to me and by whom. I am leaving this for my granddaughter, Because she is the only one who will follow it all the way down and do what is right even when it costs her. I sat in that office and cried, and it wasn't grief, or it wasn't only grief. It was the awful, late arriving knowledge that she had spent her last years completely alone with the truth, unable to make a single person believe her, and she'd kept her dignity and her records both, and she'd trusted me to finish it. In a family where I'd always been the odd one, the one who asked the wrong questions, she'd looked at exactly that and seen the only person worth handing the key. Detective Reyes called the next day, and this time it wasn't about my aunt. "We've been following the money out the other side," she said, "where it landed after it left your grandmother's accounts. You should know about your cousin." My cousin, with the watch and the easy voice and the smug certainty that he was better than the rest of us. He hadn't just been handed money, the detective said. He'd registered a shell company, Larkspur Restoration LLC, a fake home improvement outfit that never restored a single thing, and roughly $500,000 had washed through it over 5 years. The roof that never got fixed. The invoices my grandmother had flagged in her ledger. He hadn't been an innocent kid taking gifts from his mother. He'd built the laundromat, his condo, his car, the watch he checked at the funeral. All of it sat on top of money he helped steal from a woman who taught him Twinkle Twinkle when he was 6. And then the detectives team ran the full background, the way they do, and found the thing that explained all of it. 12 years earlier, my aunt had been the live-in helper for an elderly widow, 2 streets over, a woman with no close family. When that woman died, her modest savings had simply evaporated, and a niece in another state had raised a stink. But there was no proof and no record, and nothing ever came of it. My aunt had done this before. She'd practiced on a stranger and graduated to her own mother, and my grandmother had known about the first one. That's why she'd never trusted her. That's why she'd been so careful, so quiet, so patient. She'd watched the dress rehearsal. Detective Reyes asked me to do the hardest thing in this whole story, harder than the trash in the bank and the tears in the lawyer's office. She asked me to keep going to Sunday dinner, to say nothing, to let my aunt rush the house sale paperwork, which, by the way, kept stalling, because you can't actually sell a dead woman's house while it's tied up in probate, no matter how badly you want to, and watching my aunt grind her teeth over that delay became one of my few small pleasures. The detective needed time to build the case airtight, and a warned thief is a thief who shreds documents. So for almost 3 weeks, I sat across a table from the 2 people who had robbed my grandmother blind and smiled at her funeral, and I ate my aunt's dry pot roast and asked about the house sale and pretended my whole world wasn't a held breath. One Sunday, my aunt pulled me aside, lowered her voice into that fake soft register, and told me, "I know things have been tense, but we're family, Della. Your grandmother would want us to lean on each other." I told her, of course, family first. I have never wanted to laugh and scream at the same time so badly in my life. There's a particular kind of patience my grandmother used to drill into me at the keyboard. You don't rush the rest is part of the music. And I'd never understood it until I was sitting in that dining room, counting the days, holding the loudest silence of my life. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning, simultaneous so neither of them could warn the other. I wasn't there. Detective Reyes told me about it after. My aunt opened her front door in her bathrobe with a coffee mug in her hand and saw the badges. And for just a second, the detective said the whole performance fell off her face, and there was just a woman watching the bottom drop out of a life built on a lie. She tried it one last time. There's been a mistake. My mother was confused. I was protecting her. And the detective just laid it out flat. A 3-year file. A notarized statement. Bank records of a denied fraud attempt. A cassette in her own voice. A shell company with her son's name on it. This isn't a mistake, ma'am. These are consequences. They cuffed her on her own porch. Across town at the same minute, my cousin got walked out of a client meeting in front of every colleague he'd ever tried to impress. You don't come back from that. Whatever he'd built, the watch and the swagger and the story about himself, it died in that conference room. The case took months. Their lawyers tried everything. They argued my grandmother was incompetent and her statement should be tossed, until the prosecution brought in two doctors who'd actually examined her and testified she was sharp as a tack, and that the original incompetency finding had been built entirely on information my aunt supplied. My cousin's lawyer came to me privately and offered a deal. My cousin would testify against his mother for a lighter sentence, said he'd been manipulated, that he was a victim too. I thought about it for about the length of one held note. Tell him our grandmother taught me to keep my own time, I said, and I don't follow a player who's already proven he can't hold a beat. It didn't matter anyway. The shell company made it impossible to call him a passive bystander. He'd signed the filings. He'd moved the money. No deal. At the sentencing, the prosecutor asked to read a victim statement, and the courtroom went still while she read my grandmother's words aloud. The same lines from the sealed envelope, and that plain, unbreakable voice. No one believed me. I am leaving this record so that one day, the truth will be louder than the lie. I watched my aunt stare at the wall, her jaw working, her hand shaking in her lap. My cousin couldn't look at anyone. He'd shrunk down into the chair, like a kid called to the principal's office, and that's all he was, under the watch. A man who'd bet his whole life on a stolen thing and lost it. The judge was not gentle. My aunt got 8 years and full restitution. My cousin got 4, and the court seized Larkspur Restoration and everything it had touched. The condo, the car, the accounts, sold off and clawed back. The watch, I heard, went to auction. Every dollar a court could trace was ordered returned to the estate. It came to far more than I ever expected, and the law did the thing the comments under stories like this always beg for. It didn't just punish them, it took back what they took. That was a year ago. I didn't quit my job and I didn't buy a yacht. I kept the cottage. I couldn't sell the place where she taught half the town to play, and I didn't want to. I had the old upright tuned and rebuilt by a man who actually wept a little when he opened it up and saw the wear on the hammers. I cleared off the front room, put new light in, and on Saturday mornings now the neighborhood kids come and I teach them for free. Badly. Nothing like she did. And there's a tin of butterscotch by the door, because some traditions you don't get to retire. I framed her metronome and her sworn statement and hung them on the wall above the bench, and under them, on a little card in her own handwriting that I found tucked in the back of the ledger, the thing she used to say when a student rushed, "You can't fake a rhythm. The hand always tells on you." My aunt writes me letters from prison. Long ones, full of blame and excuses and demands that I forgive her, that I do the Christian thing, that I send money because the restitution left her with nothing. I don't write back. Some doors you close, and they were never yours to open again. My cousin will get out eventually, with a record and no one left who will take his calls. And that's a sentence longer than any judge can hand down. I think about her every Saturday, when the room fills up with the worst rendition of Ode to Joy the human ear can withstand, and I think about how she spent her last years alone with the truth, holding the line, keeping the record, waiting for the one person who'd hear what everyone else was too busy or too greedy to listen for. She left me a fortune. But that's not what she left me. She left me proof that being the one who notices, the one who asks, the one who won't let it go, the thing my whole family called a flaw, was the thing she was counting on the entire time. The hand always tells on you. She was right about that, the way she was right about almost everything. It just took her and me and a brass key hidden in a slow movement nobody else could play to make the truth loud enough for a courtroom to finally hear it. For a long time I believed the quiet people lose. The ones who don't raise their voice, who keep their receipts, who sit at the end of the table and notice things. I thought the world just rolled over them. My grandmother taught me different, and she taught it the hard way, from inside a trap she couldn't claw out of. She couldn't outshout my aunt. She couldn't outsmuffle her. What she could do was refuse to lie, even when every document in the county said she was confused. She kept her record straight and clean, because she knew that one day someone would finally sit down and read it, and a clean record doesn't bend no matter who's holding it. I think a lot about why my aunt lost everything, and my grandmother in the end won. It wasn't luck. My aunt took the shortcut every single time. The forged signature, the fake roof, The doctor she talked into a diagnosis, and every shortcut left a footprint. You can't steal for 6 years without the math turning on you. My cousin built a whole life on a lie and never once asked himself whether a thing that easy could possibly be clean. The rot was always there under the watch and the easy smile. It just took a brass key to bring it into the light. That's the part people miss about consequences. They aren't a punishment that falls from the sky. They're just the truth catching up at its own pace. What I want you to take from Opal, if you take anything, is that the 3 things that saved her are things you can build in yourself starting today. The first is the simple refusal to look away from what's wrong, even when it's family, even when it costs you, the backbone to say that is not right and mean it. The second is the habit of paying attention, of asking the question everyone else is too polite or too lazy to ask, of reading page 40 when the rest of the room stopped at page 2. And the third is the plain, stubborn endurance to wait, to keep your records and keep your dignity and not break, when the easy thing would be to give up and let the lie win, because the lie is louder. She had all 3 alone in a cottage everyone had written off. A widow with a piano and a notebook, and she beat them. I teach kids now in that same front room, and most of them will never know what happened there. But I tell them the thing she told me, the one I finally understand. You can't fake a rhythm. The hand always tells on you. Be the person whose hand tells the truth, and learn to hear the people whose hands don't. Because someday it might be a grandmother nobody believes, sliding a key into your palm, betting everything she has left on you, being the one who finally listens.